to do that. But I look at them from what I've seen so far and reading up on them, and I don't think South Carolina should have an issue in this game. An interesting topic for this week, though, is what's going to happen in regards to quarterback. Of course, on Saturday, Lenore Sellers gets hurt late in the first half, goes to the locker room before everybody else at halftime, comes out in the third quarter, tries to play a little bit. It's clearly not feeling good for him for that ankle injury, and Robbie Ashford ends up finishing out the game. Heard John Strickland just mentioned this in the last hour, and I don't think many people would disagree with this, that if Lenore Sellers is healthy and plays that entire game, South Carolina probably wins, even despite the bad officiating and all that kind of stuff. But again, you can't go back and change it. But what's intriguing now is what happens going forward in reference to Lenore Sellers' health. Coach Beamer yesterday in his presser did tell us that, hey, he feels good. He says he's good to go and all that kind of stuff. And the plan as of right now is for him to start this weekend. And ideally, that's what you'd love to do, because it's very clear the offense is not the same without Lenore Sellers. You certainly lose your ability to open up a passing game when Robbie Ashford is in there. As we saw in the late stages on Saturday, where South Carolina just could not get anything going for most of their last couple drives outside of, Rocket Sanders busting off that long touchdown run, just because they became so one-dimensional. And defense was able to load the box because, they're just going to run it either with Ashford or Rocket Sanders, and we're going to be able to defend that pretty easily because we know the threat of the pass isn't there like it is with, with Lenore Sellers. And, Sellers is obviously going to want to play. He's a competitor, and even if he is feeling a little sore, he's going to believe, and he's going to tell the coaches hey, I'm good to go. Don't worry about me. We're fine. There's a balance there, though. You do have to be very careful with how you manage this, because yes, you obviously want to have your best option out there for Saturday, because you never know. Again, Old Dominion surprised you, that you don't want to put yourself in a position where you might have trouble against a team like Akron. But at the same time, you have to think long-term for the health of Lenore Sellers and how that fares for the end of the season. Yesterday, we'll go with cut number 4 here, Dave. Coach Beamer was asked the question by one of the people in the media, if you have to protect Lenore Sellers from himself in an instance like this.
Yeah, but we're trying to win a game Saturday night, and that's not going to be easy either. And I know it's easy to say, well, this is not an SEC team, and they're 1-2, and they lost to Ohio State and Rutgers. This team presents problems, and we've got to do what we have to do to win the football game on Saturday. But certainly we're always going to do what's best for our players and our football team. But we've got a bunch of competitors, and Saturday, Lenore's wanted to play in that game. I didn't think it was best for him or the team for him to finish the second half from a health standpoint. I just didn't think he was where he needed to be. So certainly if a guy's where he needs to be, and any position, quarterback or kicker or whatever, if they feel like they're where they need to be in order to play, and we feel like they're where they need to be, then we're going to get them out there for sure.
And of course, this is the Tuesday press conference, and you're not trying to tip your opponent off to what you're doing. So even if Lenore Sellers is not, in a healthy enough place to be able to play this Saturday, you're not probably going to say that outright on Tuesday. And this not being an SEC, this being a non-conference game this weekend, you don't have to put out your availability reports like you would for the SEC. So you can play this a little closer to the vest than you can in most other weeks. So yeah, you can put out there, hey, Lenore Sellers is playing, and have them scheme up for him and plan for him. And then if you have to throw a curveball with somebody else, maybe you can catch them off guard with that. But it is a balance that you have to have here, where, again, Sellers is a competitor. He's going to say, yeah, I'm good, coach. But if you're assessing it and the trainers are telling you or whatever that, hey, we think he's about 85% and could re-injure this ankle this weekend, on just, getting rolled up the wrong way or something like that, then you're potentially putting yourself in danger for the games down the line. Because here's the thing. If Sellers isn't playing against Ole Miss or Alabama or teams like that in the next couple of weeks, I don't think South Carolina has a very good chance. There's a reason he is your starting quarterback, because he gives you the best opportunity within this offense to move the ball down the field. And as we saw with Robbie Ashford, there's a significant step back in performance on the offense when Sellers is not in there. So you got to be careful that if you feel like there's a chance for re-injury this weekend, you might just consider sending him, saying, hey, you know what? Not only do we have a non-conference opponent this weekend, you got a bye week the next week. You have the potential to let him really rest for the better part of 3 weeks leading up to the Ole Miss game, where he can be hopefully as close to 100% for that game to, again, give you the best chance from a quarterbacking position to be competitive and try and win that game. Because I can guarantee you, if we go into that game and it's Robbie Ashford starting at quarterback, that confidence level is going to be significantly lower than if it is Lenore Sellers. So you got to be careful how you manage this. And I'm not telling Coach Beamer or the staff anything they don't know. They're professionals. They've been doing this for a long time. They are well aware of this. From our standpoint, it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this week, this week, and what they ultimately decide to do. I did want to play one more thing here, because it's just assumed that, well, if Sellers can't go, then it's going to be Robbie Ashford. Maybe not. There's a possibility that it could be somebody else. Cut number 3 here, Dave. This is Coach Beamer yesterday talking about possible second options for quarterback if Sellers can't go this weekend.
Yeah, and we told Robbie and Davis they'll continue to compete this week, and Lenoris assures me he's good and will be ready to roll. But Robbie went into the LSU game as the second quarterback and came out of the LSU game as the second quarterback. He'll be better for it. Davis is someone that we have a lot of confidence in. There's no question about it, and we'll continue to develop everybody at every position.
And where would Luke Doty fit in, if at all, to quarterback?
He'd be in the mix as well. I think we'd be, dumb not to. And the thing with Luke all along, David, has been you go focus on receiver and special teams, but you're not getting too far away from quarterback. And Luke's a smart kid. I mean, he. We've gotten him some reps at quarterback periodically throughout the season already, and he doesn't miss a beat when he goes in there.
I think the question you have to ask if Sellers is not going to be available this weekend is, can you beat an Akron team without having to throw the ball as much? When you look at the statistics, Akron's defense is 110th in the nation in rush defense, averaging 184 yards per game, 68th against the pass, averaging 202 yards per game. So theoretically, saying that, you might be able to beat them by just focusing on the ground game more than anything else. And yes, I think Robbie Ashford would probably have a better opportunity passing against a weaker defense like Akron, as opposed to what he was doing against LSU this past weekend. So maybe you can even open it up a little bit more against this kind of opponent with Kyle Ashford, which may raise his confidence and build him a little bit more rapport with the wide receivers on this team to potentially set him up better going forward. Should you end up needing him again, because unfortunately we're 3 games into the season and Robbie Ashford's had to be featured from an injury standpoint in 2 of them, because Sellers has had to miss time against Kentucky and LSU. And you hope that does not become a trend, certainly. But again, there's a reason why he was your backup quarterback and plays a similar type of quarterback style to Lenore Sellers, because that creates an easier transition between the two should Sellers end up going out here. But he said it's competition between Ashford and Davis Bevel, who I know he's not played a ton in his college career, but based on the numbers is somebody a little bit more keen in passing than his running ability. So gives you a little bit of a different look there. And maybe it's a situation where you play both those guys. Maybe it's like, okay, well, we're going to have, Bevel for the duration of the drive, but in short yardage, goal line, that kind of stuff, we'll bring in Robbie Ashford. Again, they're throwing a lot of things out there, plus a lot of different ways and ideas you could go with this if you end up having to, because Lenore Sellers can't play. And I do think it's funny, and Cloniger asked the question there, what is Luke Doty? Where does he factor into this? And he's been a wide receiver pretty much for all intents and purposes up to this point, but never too far away from being a quarterback. Of course, he's somebody that is very athletic, can run, can throw. So if you felt like you didn't have a good enough option with your other 2 quarterbacks that are on scholarship, or other 3, I guess, when you counted Dante Reno, you could always go Luke Doty route. I don't think they would go that far. I most likely would assume it's going to be Robbie Ashford this weekend if Lenore Sellers can't go, but you have options. So it's better than not having a variety in that quarterback room to be able to mix and match with should Sellers not be able to go. I want to see Sellers play. I hope Sellers is healthy enough and they feel comfortable enough putting him out there where he can continue to build confidence and build chemistry with his teammates around him, because we've seen that through the first 3 games. Yeah, he looked very shaky in that first game. Only completed around 50% of his passes. He was overthrowing, underthrowing. He had receivers dropping it. Like, being able to go out there against a team like Akron, hopefully putting up a lot of good numbers and scoring a lot of points, you build that confidence that you're going to need going into these very tough games in the month of October and through the rest of the season. That I do worry if he is sitting out this week, that might not take a significant step back, but maybe a slight step back, just not having that continuity there, as opposed to him being able to play in the game. So we'll see what happens. We'll continue to monitor this as the week goes along and see who ends up taking the snaps come Saturday night against the Akron Zips. Seth Emerson of The Athletic does a weekly vibe check in the SEC. Where does he have South Carolina after a tough loss to LSU this past week? And we'll check on that, as well as what his thoughts around the rest of the SEC are. Coming up next, it is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here in the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrad along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Reminder, Lord Lisa's Special Teams Touchdown Contest rolls on for another week. $400 up for grabs this weekend against Akron. If South Carolina can score a special teams touchdown, go online to 1075thegame.com. Register for your chance to win. And again, $100 out of the pot each and every game as the season rolls along. Came close this past weekend with Mo Brown blocking the punt. And hopefully somebody will win that money at some point this season. As I mentioned a moment ago, Seth Emerson of The Athletic, who covers the SEC, publishes his weekly vibe check on where he's feeling teams are at as of right now, based on week to week. And this can fluctuate quite a bit based on what your recent performance is. For reference, last week after South Carolina's bludgeoning of Kentucky, they were number 5 in his rankings. And this week they fall to 11 after losing to LSU. And his quick little synopsis is, maybe it would have hurt more to lose in a blowout, but as painful as this all was, penalties, turnovers, losing to Norris Sellers, a missed opportunity is better than not looking like you belong. The Gamecocks look like they belong. They just need some maturing, and that's something to build on. There was a lot of fear in the fan base going into this past weekend. I saw it on Twitter. I saw it on our text line, phone calls, all that kind of stuff. People were really afraid South Carolina was just going to go out there and get embarrassed by LSU. They didn't hope that was going to happen, but it was kind of one of those, I've seen this story before kind of thing that we talked about a lot last week. Like, man, you finally get an opportunity to, showcase yourself on a national stage, and you go out there and get embarrassed. That's not what happened. And as much as it sucks to lose in the way that Carolina did, as he referenced there, with, penalties costing you points, losing your quarterback that, if he stays in the game, you have a very good shot of winning that one, as well as missing a kick there at the very end. You went out there and showed the country, like, hey, this team's legit. And I think a lot of the country is on the side of South Carolina in watching that game, saying, yeah, those calls did not go your way. And if they had gone your way, we're probably talking about a different outcome. Or if it would have just been called down the middle, we're probably talking about a different outcome. So you impressed a lot of people with this game this past weekend, to where I think people are more respectful of South Carolina, saying, okay, they've got something going there. And I think it helps as well that Kentucky went out there and did what they did against Georgia over the weekend, where they literally took them to the limit. And if Mark Stoops doesn't decide to punt with only a couple minutes to go, at midfield, who knows what happens? And maybe Kentucky pulls the upset there. So for South Carolina to go out there and bludgeon Kentucky the way they did 2 weeks ago, and that team take at the time, number 1 team in the country all the way down to the end, reflects well on South Carolina. Now, that doesn't mean South Carolina is going to be favored against Ole Miss or Alabama in the next couple weeks, or even in Oklahoma coming up at the end of October. But I think a lot more people look at those games and say, okay, it's not going to be a blowout, or shouldn't be a blowout. South Carolina has the pieces and has the skill on their team to make these games competitive. And certainly when your defense is playing as well as it has, you're going to have opportunities to be in a lot of these games. And as he references, maturing. As we've seen with the Norris Sellers, getting better week by week. This receiving corps seems to be getting better week by week. Still room to improve. Don't need to fix the drops, those kind of things, but getting better. Defense, which has surprised a lot of people early on in the season, is getting better. And that's where you hang your hat on what this team is this year. Saying, okay, we're starting at this point, and by midseason, we're going to be this much farther forward. By the end of the season, we're going to be that much farther forward. And by the end of the year, hopefully we're talking about a even better team than what took the field up against Kentucky 2 weeks ago and won that game. So 11th, obviously, you lose a game, that's gonna drop you a little bit. But South Carolina has certainly, I think, garnered a lot of respect for the way that they've played so far through this young season. Wanted to kind of peruse the rest of his vibe check here and where he feels like teams are sitting in the SEC. No surprise, Texas is at number 1, which matches where they currently sit now in the AP poll as the number 1 team in the nation for the first time since the 2008 season. That was back in the Colt McCoy days. Texas has pretty much done everything right this season. There has not really been a sign of weakness or a sign of flinching. They went out there and dominated Michigan a couple weeks ago. This past weekend, even in losing Quinn Ewers, your potential Heisman candidate quarterback, soon to be possibly first-round pick next year, even in losing him in a non-conference game nonetheless, but they didn't look like they skipped a beat with Arch Manning coming in there. This is a deep football team. This is a talented football team. This is a well-coached football team. And Steve Sarkisian, you got to give him a lot of credit because for the past decade, Texas has been that team that, has those glimmers of looking really good and being back, quote unquote, and then falling back down. It means, there goes Texas again. Why do we believe in them? No, Sarkisian's got that program in a really good place to where last year wasn't just flash in the pan. This team is legit. This team has a shot at winning the SEC. This team is in the mix for the national championship once again. Like, Texas is not going away, and they are set to make an impact in their first year in the SEC, or they'll start playing conference games here very soon. Number 2 on the list, Tennessee. Tennessee, kind of like Texas, has shown you no signs of true weakness at this point this year. It took a little bit of time for their offense to get going against NC State a couple weeks ago, but Nico certainly looks the part. I mean, I know UT Chattanooga and Kent State don't provide the best competition, but they went out there and put up flashy style points, and Josh Heupel feeling very good about where his offense is as of right now. Heading into this weekend, I know we'll obviously be at the South Carolina game because it's happening at the same time, but man, this Tennessee-Oklahoma game in Norman, Josh Heupel returning back home, that's a big, big deal. That's going to be a raucous environment. I think Tennessee is probably going to win by a couple scores, but I'm intrigued to keep an eye on that game on Saturday and see how it ends up going because the folks in Tennessee feeling very good about where they are as of right now. And then Alabama at number 3. So going back 2 weeks ago, Alabama was in a very uncomfortable spot for the second year in a row, funny enough, against South Florida, where it's, a 1 point game with 8-9 minutes to go in that one. And, I don't know if I'm watching that game thinking, well, I think South Florida's, going to pull the upset here. I think it was more of if Alabama can just stop making mistakes, they should be fine. And they did in those last couple of minutes, end up obviously pulling away and, winning that game 42 to 16. And everyone's like, oh, what's going on with Alabama? What's wrong with Alabama? The way they went out there and bludgeoned Wisconsin this past weekend. Yes, I know Tyler Van Dyke did get injured early in that game, which, by the way, I think I saw that he's going to be out for the rest of the season, which is unfortunate for the Wisconsin program. But even him being at full health, Wisconsin was not going to hang in there with Alabama in that game. They reestablished to everyone, like, hey, this is still same old Alabama. No reason to think otherwise there. So, again, that's a quick vibe check from Seth Emerson of The Athletic of where he thinks teams are right now in the SEC. And, again, this is going to change week to week. And, I don't know how much South Carolina can rise if they go out there and dominate Akron this upcoming weekend, but an opportunity to continue to impress people, not only in the conference but around the country with some of the big teams they have coming up here in the next couple weeks. We'll talk with the guy Dimitri Urvanos coming up next as there's a lot of news happening around both college football and the NFL, particularly when it comes to the Panthers and their decision earlier on this week to bench Bryce Young. We'll get his thoughts on that and what he thinks this means for Dave Canales' team going forward. It's coming up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game.
military, and more.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday, as we do each and every Wednesday. Our guy, Dimitri Ravenos, joining me for a couple minutes here. And Dimitri, of course, our resident Panthers expert. And, of course, the news coming out on Monday that the Panthers are going to sit Bryce Young down for an unforeseen amount of time at this point in time and let Andy Dalton take over the reins at quarterback. And my question to you is, after the game on Sunday where they lost to the Chargers, Dave Canales said, well, Bryce Young is still going to be our quarterback going forward. What changed in the 24 hours after that led to this decision?
I don't know if anything changed. I think that Dave Canales was basically letting us all in on the reality that I think we suspected, but we may not have known, which is it's not my call. It's Dave Tepper's call, the owner of this team. I think that either Canales wanted to keep Young as the starting quarterback, and Tepper said, no, this is too embarrassing. We can't do this anymore. Or Canales wanted to bench Bryce and knew that he had not talked to Tepper yet, and so he couldn't say that definitively without jeopardizing his job. I mean, look, Tyler, you know that there is no bigger defender of Bryce Young than me. Like, I think that he was horribly mismanaged and was done no favors by this team, but over the last 2 weeks, you know, it's clear that two things are true. Yes, he was horribly mismanaged by this team, but he's not an NFL quarterback right now. Can he turn it around? Honestly, I don't know. But, Dave Canales, Dave Tepper, GM Dan Morgan, anybody in a leadership position with the Panthers is doing the rest of that team a disservice and doing the fans a disservice if they ran Bryce out there for week 3. We've seen enough.
Yeah, and my question, I guess, is because, again, Canales was hired really for the sole purpose of developing Bryce Young for what he did with Mayfield, what he was able to do with Geno Smith at his prior stops. Bryce Young didn't play a lot in the preseason, from what I remember. Again, only 2 games into this year so far. So, what was that time frame of when things were supposed to start to change or look different? And again, obviously, it looks like he's not progressed at all through the 2 games we saw. Is that too soon to pull the trigger? Do you need more time on those kind of things? How do you balance that?
I don't know if it is too soon to pull the trigger, because you do have to consider what we saw last year, right? And what we saw last year in terms of QBR through his first 18 starts in the NFL, there is only one person in history with a QBR lower than Bryce at that point, and his name was Ryan Leaf, and that doesn't pretend very well, right? So I don't think it was too soon. I do think, to your point, this is sort of the inexperience in the big chair shining through with Dave Canales. I think if Dave Canales had more experience as a head coach, maybe he could have couched Tepper's expectations of, I've got a whole program to manage here. I will not be able to dedicate all of the time Bryce will need to him without the rest of the team suffering, or vice versa. And then also, I get it that, he is who the team is built around, at least the way Dave Canales was talking when he got hired. This is the guy that the team is built around for the foreseeable future. Why risk getting him injured in the preseason? Well, when you have the first year that you did, and you are now putting him on his, 4th different play caller in just over 1 season of action, you can't afford not to play him. Sure. In the preseason. And the Panthers didn't, except for 1 series against the Bills Scrubs, a group that I believe Mel Kiper pointed this out yesterday on ESPN. The 11 guys that started that series for the Bills in the 3rd preseason game, none of them made the active roster.
Yeah, probably not the best litmus test for the guy you're trying to improve in year number 2. So Andy Dalton is now going to be the quarterback, and he was the backup, last year. And I posed this question a year ago before Bryce Young was named the starter, for week number 1 in 2023. Would it have benefited him to go ahead and sit the bench for a period of time last year to learn, instead of throwing him out to the wolves with a very under-talented roster that the Panthers had, that was kind of setting him up for failure to begin with?
Yeah, and a coach that didn't want him, and a owner that didn't really seem to care what his coach wanted when it came to drafting. Yeah, it would have benefited him. I think part of the problem all along with the way the roster was built when they went out and decided, even before they decided on Bryce, when it was going to be either Bryce or C.J. Stroud, signing Andy Dalton as your backup tells you that the plan is to start the rookie. There was no alternative to that, because I'm sorry, the team may look better with Andy Dalton because Andy Dalton's a functional NFL quarterback. They're not going to win games, right? They still have a bad quarterback. They just have a bad NFL quarterback.
Right.
It would have benefited him. Is it too late now? I don't know, man, but the dude, Bryce, looks broken. So I don't know how much buildup there has to be before you could actually feasibly think of him as being the starting quarterback again.
And this is a move that is in theory supposed to be temporary, saying, okay, Andy Dalton's going to start, and at some point down the line, we're going to have the confidence in Bryce again to put him back out there. For one, how long does that take? And two, how do you know when things have progressed enough where you give him another chance? Because clearly he's doing what he needs to do in practice. He's doing what he needs to do, leading up to the game. But when it's game time, he's not that guy.
Yeah, I mean, there's an expiration date on this, and it is the end of the season. I think it is important to point out Dave Canales has not publicly said this is temporary, but the fact of the matter is, if Dalton starts the rest of the year, he is going to be looking for a much bigger contract next year, and I'm sorry, he's just not worth it. So then you've got a decision to make. Are you going to pay Dalton? And if you do, you've got to commit to him as a starter. Do you think it is possible to rehab Bryce and give him another go at being a starting quarterback? Well, if that's the case, then you've got to go get a different backup. Or are we just cutting ties with both and moving on and using what is probably going to be the first pick of the draft on what is probably going to be a not very NFL-ready guy?
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, with this upcoming draft, as far as, what Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, it's not as deep of a quarterback pool as we've had these past couple of years, and you could find yourself right back in the situation again next year and the years after that. So it's like a never-ending cycle. Bad teams continue to be bad for a reason because they do routinely make bad decisions.
Yeah, I mean, look, the three guys you hear about as the quote-unquote best quarterback in this draft all make me nervous on an NFL level. Quinn Ewers to me is Bo Nix. Like, you've been in college longer than everybody else, you better be that good, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean you are ready for the NFL. Let me give you a name that is like the perfect picture of that. Kenny Pickett. The other guy you hear is Shadur Sanders, and I'm sorry, I don't think he's mature enough to be an NFL quarterback. And Carson Beck, I don't know, man. Yeah, he's probably the best of this group, but this group kind of sucks.
Yeah, he's fine, but I mean, compared to the prior number one pick that came out of Georgia, Matt Stafford, he's definitely a long way from that.
I would say this: Beck is probably the best of this group. Beck does not look nearly as good in college as Bryce Young did, and look at where we are with Bryce Young.
Very true. How much does C.J. Stroud factor into these kind of decisions being made? Because from what I remember, Frank Wright was very much a CJ Stroud guy, and David Tepper said, no, we're going to get Bryce Young, and you're going to make Bryce Young work. And, of course, now we're in this mess, and Frank Wright didn't even get a full year. Meanwhile, CJ Stroud's going out there and looking like a superstar in year one with DeMeco Ryans and Houston. Obviously started off the season well, this season as well. So how much of that is putting more pressure on Bryce Young to go out there and succeed when, again, he's set up to fail, basically?
Can I vent here for a second?
Sure, you got 2.5 minutes.
Okay, I don't think you can answer this without also talking about the way the fans are reacting to the CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young thing. I am so sick of Panthers fans looking at this as if they just had a time machine, right? If we had just taken CJ Stroud, if they had just hired Steve Wilkes instead of Frank Reich. Dude, this team is hot garbage. If they had drafted CJ Stroud would be hot garbage. Not to the degree of Bryce Young. It is 100% fair to say there is a mental thing going on with Bryce that he is not ready to be an NFL quarterback. But the CJ Stroud you see in Houston is not the CJ Stroud we would have gotten in Carolina. Steve Wilkes was 6-6 when he took over as the interim after they fired Matt Rule. Go look at what Steve Wilkes did the one time he got a full season to be an NFL head coach. He was 3-13 with a garbage quarterback, Sam Rosen, who, by the way, is above Bryce Young on that list of, where your QBR is through 18 games. This team, from top to bottom, is just trash. I don't care which of the pieces you would have moved in or out. It is still trash. It does not matter if Luke Skywalker walked into that garbage chute or slid down the garbage chute. He was still in garbage with a monster that wanted to eat him. That is the Carolina Panthers.
Well, certainly no signs of it getting better anytime soon, but for the time being, Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle, is quarterbacking the Panthers starting this upcoming weekend. We'll see how long that ends up lasting. Come back, wrap up hour number one of the Extra Point. Tennessee adding some prices to their upcoming season tickets for 2025 to benefit the athletes. We'll see how this goes over. It's coming up next. Tyler and Dimitri Ravenos along with you on the Extra Point here on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head, Dimitri Ravenos along with you here on this Wednesday on the game. Of course, Saturday night, Gamecocks back in action, taking on Akron. 7:30 kick. Pregame coverage starting at 2:30 on Saturday with myself and Terry Ford for Gamecocks game day, leading you up to network coverage, and then again kick at 7:30. If you are attending the game, you likely paid a decent amount for the tickets, as tickets these days for anything are certainly not cheap. But for Tennessee football in 2025, well, those tickets are going to go up even higher than they were, I imagine, pretty high this year. And a raise of 14.5%, with 10% of that going to the athletes as a part of the expected revenue sharing model that is set to take place for the 2025 season. So part of paying your tickets, for Tennessee football at least, will now go directly to paying the athletes on the field.
Yeah, the NCAA, or excuse me, I should say, schools are going to find every way they can not to actually do this themselves. They're going to pass the cost off to everybody they can possibly figure out to. I don't hate that the money is going to the athletes, Tyler, but I think that this is sort of a dangerous way to go about doing this, right? Like at some point you are going to price out the dude. Like let's say this comes to Carolina, right? At some point you are going to end up pricing out the dude from, let's say, Anderson, where it's not easy to get to Columbia for a game, that maybe only makes it down once a year, maybe makes it down with his kid once every 2 or 3 years. Like at some point we've got to decide how important are these 60 to 70 to 80,000 seat stadiums being filled to us, because both can exist. And
that's the thing that worries me about this, because college sports across the board are seen as a lot more accessible than pro sports. I think about, like, you know, being from Atlanta, being a Falcons fan, when Mercedes-Benz Stadium was built and they had the PSLs and all that kind of stuff that priced out the average person from just saying, hey, you know, I want to go to the Falcons game this weekend. Well, here's 20 things you have to buy before you can get in the door to go there. And I know a lot of people that said, well, I just don't go to the games anymore. And I don't want, and certainly there are, you know, levels of donations and things like that that can put you in elite places in the stadium at Williams-Brice and stuff like that. But the average person still has that ability to just, hey, I want to pay a couple bucks, go to a game, you know, against Wofford or whatever it may be, and, you know, just go have a good time. And I don't want that to ever go away. But I imagine Tennessee doing this as the first one, there's going to be a lot of other programs look at that and say, that's a pretty good idea. We get the people paying the ticket prices to, you know, can't even do the math on what that money would be, you know, for 60, 70,000 people with season tickets, but it would be a decent chunk of change for that, you know, assumed $22-ish million cap limit that we've heard about for this new revenue sharing model, where, yes, they could certainly get the money from other places, but if they have that from the ticket revenue, then they certainly would go that route too.
I think what is going to be interesting as schools around the SEC and beyond look to figure out how they're going to get this $22 million that we all think is going to go to athlete compensation. What's interesting are some of the other things that are coming down the pipeline, right? Like there's not a lot an athletic department can turn around and sell to raise that money, but there are things that maybe they don't need to do anymore, right? Like the Alabama and Georgia, hell, even the Gamecocks facility, which is relatively new, the practice facility, the training facility, dude, that's better than NFL quality. Like at some point, these schools are going to wake up to the fact that in a world where these kids can make money off their name, image, and likeness, can make money directly from the schools, facility, like all the cool bells and whistles of a facility don't really matter that much. And this was kind of wasted money that we're using so the government doesn't get it, right? Or so that we can say, oh gosh, we're at the very limit of spending. There's no way we could afford to pay the athletes. Well, yeah, you can. It's just more about saving and not spending than it is about selling. I think this is a Band-Aid for Tennessee that's, you know, we don't quite know how it's going to work just yet.
I always thought the facilities thing was the silliest arms race to me, because it became, okay, which teams have slides in their facility, who has a barbershop, and who has a studio where I can go record a rap album.
Carolina has a studio in their facility. Are you telling me, well, I guess Will was still the coach when that facility was finished. Are you telling me Will wanted something on quote unquote football property that encourage guys not to think about football. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I don't think he would have. I don't think it was up to him to sign off on that.
I was about to say he had to put on a nice face because when Darius Rucker donates it, you say yes, thank you. Totally get that, and that's a totally fair way to react when a famous alum. I think Darius is an alum, at the very least, part of the family,
as far as I know,
wants to make a donation of that sort. But yeah, man, it just doesn't matter to a lot of these guys as much as we think it does when they have the ability to get money and spend it however they want.
Yeah, and again, we know this new model is coming down the pipeline, and I give Tennessee credit for finding a avenue to try and get that money. And I think a lot of people are going, or a lot of other programs are going to fall in line behind them, saying, "Hey, it's a pretty good idea. We should do that too."
Yeah, I have a friend that played at LSU, like right at the height of this facilities race. And everyone at LSU had I guess 3s at the time.
Okay.
PlayStation 3s at their locker with a TV. And he said it's this crazy double-edged sword because either you're in there and you've beaten every game, and so having a PS3 at your locker is not that big of a deal, or you're in there playing and someone comes in and yells at you for playing PS3 at the football facility. Yeah. Like, what are you supposed to do? It doesn't make sense.
It's cool for the visit, not as functional when you actually get to be a part of the team. Appreciate it, Dimitri. We'll check in with you again next week.
All right, buddy. Sounds good.
Hey, Dimitri Rivantos, hour number 2 coming up, the Extra Point. We'll take a look at South Carolina's schedule, see how we're feeling after a few games, some of these other teams here on the game. Oh, Tyler Head, always love telling you about our friends over at Twin Peaks. As I mentioned the other day, this is a very special day down at Twin Peaks. It is National Cheeseburger Day. What better way to celebrate than with a seasoned, smashed, and seared-to-order cheeseburger topped with your choice of cheese, paired up with a 22-ounce Coors Light or Miller Lite for just $12 all day long. And hey, if you're not in a drinking mood, you can grab a cheeseburger with a tea or soda bundled together for just $10 all day long. Head on down to Twin Peaks right down the street from us here in the Vista and enjoy National Cheeseburger Day. But anytime is a good time to be down at Twin Peaks. Obviously, TVs as far as the eye can see, those delicious 29-degree draft beers, and all the amazing food, not just the cheeseburgers, that you can enjoy each and every day, especially during football season when there is so much to watch. That's our friends Twin Peaks down in the Vista. 10 o'clock, welcome back in hour number 2. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game, making our way through the week. So we get set for South Carolina and Akron coming up this weekend. We are now a fourth of the way through the regular season. And look, we hope South Carolina's playing something in December, bowl game, whatever it may be. It'd be nice if they're in the playoff, but we're not going to set our expectations that high right now. But we hope we have more than 12 games. So I set this as a quarter of the way through the regular season as of right now, where at least we've gotten a decent amount of sample size from most of the teams that South Carolina is going to be playing to give us a little bit of a better idea of what these teams are going to be when South Carolina takes them on. Now, that being said, as we've seen through the first couple weeks of the regular season, a team can vary a lot from one week to the other, where, again, Kentucky looked like crap. And they looked like a team that wasn't going to be capable of winning 3 or 4 games this year against Carolina 2 weeks ago. And again, they took Georgia to the limit the following week. So things can certainly vary, but at least we're getting enough of a sample size now to start to form opinions on these teams. And with that, the feeling of these games that are coming up, where South Carolina stands and their ability to hopefully win all these games. But if nothing else, be competitive against some of the teams that are certainly going to be tougher. Look, this upcoming weekend against Akron, that's a game that we've talked about the entire offseason as one of the ones that South Carolina shouldn't have a problem winning. And again, Akron is statistically one of the worst teams in all of college football in most major categories. Carolina's a lot more talented than them. As long as they don't go out there and make a bunch of mistakes, they should be fine. So again, this is a game that I don't think opinions have changed on at all. If anything, maybe if you watched them play Ohio State and play Rutgers, and I know what Shane said the other day, there was a point in time where it was only a 2-touchdown game against Ohio State before they end up pulling away at the very end. And I get it. Shane's trying to, talk up the opponent as you should do each and every week. But I don't think anybody's afraid of Akron this upcoming weekend, though. Again, hey, Old Dominion surprised us, so nothing's certainly impossible. But I think everybody feels pretty comfortable going into this game against Akron this upcoming weekend. Ole Miss in 2 weeks is interesting to me because we've spent so much time in the offseason when talking about the best teams in college football, teams that we think are going to be in the college football playoff. I said with a lot of confidence before the season, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put Ole Miss in my 12-team playoff because given what they did a year ago, with how much more talented they've gotten in the offseason, it's insane to me to think that they can't be another double-digit win kind of team, which, again, in the SEC now, that should punch you a ticket to the college football playoff. We haven't really seen them tested, though, up to this point, which is kind of the funny thing that this team that legitimately is expect to be one of the better ones in college football hasn't really given us a whole lot to talk about outside of pretty dominant wins. They went out there and bludgeoned Furman in week number 1. Okay, that's expected. That's an FCS team. Same thing in Middle Tennessee State. Last weekend against Wake Forest, going on the road, playing on the CW, which was really, really weird. They've not given us much to talk about because they've dominated as expected. And in the next couple weeks, Georgia Southern this upcoming weekend, another game they should dominate. And Kentucky, we'll see what Kentucky team we get with that one. That could be more interesting than maybe we thought it was going to be a couple weeks ago. But there's still going to be so many questions about this team going into that game against South Carolina just because they haven't had to go out there and prove a whole lot to this point this season. That being said, the talent level speaks for itself. Carolina is not going to be favored coming into that game. As I've said, with the way Carolina plays defense or has played defense up to this point, you are going to have a chance. But again, I just don't know. I don't think we know enough about Ole Miss right now to form the strongest opinions on them in terms of what they're going to look like for that game against South Carolina. And maybe the Kentucky game in 2 weeks will finally tell us a little something there. Alabama has shown us a lot through the first couple games, including the South Florida game, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, where they looked as worse as they could look, where they were turning the ball over, they were shooting themselves in the foot, and scaring a lot of people in Tuscaloosa that, oh, crap, are we going to lose to South Florida? Now, I didn't have any doubts that Alabama was going to win that game. Just how good could they make it look in the end was my question. They ended up making it look pretty good by racking up 4 touchdowns there in the fourth quarter. But I think that game proved if you can force Alabama into making mistakes, or they can just self-inflict the mistakes themselves, you always have a chance there. Now, again, going on the road to Tuscaloosa is one of the tougher tasks in all of college football, period. That's a place that Alabama very rarely loses in, and the teams they lose to are usually the elite of the elite in college football. So, and of course, Alabama extremely talented throughout their entire roster, as they have always been and always will be, or have always been up to this point and should always will be if they continue to recruit, the same way with Kalen DeBoer as they did with Nick Saban. That being said, they're not the unstoppable force that maybe they were in years past, where, again, they have vulnerabilities. Jalen Milroe is a quarterback that is not good throwing mid-range. He's somebody that can throw the deep ball, he can do some short stuff, and he can run. But attacking the middle of the field is something he's not good at. Again, they have a problem on their offensive line too, where individually those guys are really talented, but across the board, it's certainly not a unit that was, pancaking people left and right 10, 12 years ago. So they're not perfect. And we've seen enough so far to show that. And again, much like Ole Miss, South Carolina's not going to go into that game favored. And it's going to take Alabama making some mistakes, I think, for South Carolina to end up winning that game. That being said, similarly to what I said with Ole Miss, the way Carolina plays defense, I don't think they're going to go out there and get bludgeoned by 7 touchdowns or something like that. I think there's a way they can make that game competitive, and we'll cross all those bridges a little bit more when they get there. But I think it's a game that people feel a little bit better about than maybe where we were when the season started. Oklahoma after that, I think it's a game that people feel a lot better about, because the expectation with Jackson Arnold was that he was going to come in there and set the world on fire in his first season as a starter. Hasn't really happened up to this point. That offense is a work in progress. Hasn't really blown people away. And that offensive line is very suspect. They've surrendered 9 sacks so far. And with what Carolina does from a pass rush standpoint, I didn't view this as a game that I thought South Carolina could go in and maybe necessarily win before the season. But looking at it now, I'm like, yeah, I think there's a path for South Carolina to go on the road and beat Oklahoma in Norman, which would be a huge, huge win, and one that, much like you almost had with LSU this past weekend, would grab a lot of people's attention if you go in there and do that. A&M, always kind of viewed that as possible, as a very winnable game. We're still learning a lot about this team too. They had the dominant win against Florida, which isn't saying a whole lot. And we gave their defense a lot of credit for hanging in there against Notre Dame. Now, we've also learned that Notre Dame maybe isn't quite as good as we thought they were. So I think a little more time to figure out what A&M is before that game comes along may shift the opinions a little bit, but I haven't seen anything from A&M to this point to think that they're definitely going to come in here and dominate South Carolina. Like, that is a game that is becoming, in my opinion, a little more winnable, or not. It's always been winnable, even more winnable as time goes along. Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt scared a lot of people those first couple weeks. Beating Virginia Tech in overtime, dominating Alcorn State. Like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't your granddad's Vandy team. This team might be able to come in here and cause some trouble. But they kind of returned to form this past week when they lost on the road at Georgia State. So Vanderbilt always going to be Vanderbilt there. Missouri, that's a team that was finally tested for the first time this past weekend against Boston College. Boston College got out to a 14-3 lead, which is like, for a team that's as good on offense as Missouri, they're a little bit slow out of the gate there. And we obviously know we're well aware of how talented they are, and certainly with that passing attack that can cause a lot of trouble for South Carolina's defense. I think kind of similarly to A&M, I'm interested to learn more about them as they get into more of SEC play before that game comes along. But that's one that is certainly looking like an uphill battle. Now, you do get the benefit of that game being in Columbia this time as opposed to going on the road in Como. And again, like I've said many times, the defense is going to give you a chance if they continue to play the way that they've played. And Wofford, again, that's a game that you should have no problem winning their FCS team. Just don't shoot yourself in the foot, and you should be fine. Clemson has shown us good and bad in the 2 games they played so far, getting dominated by Georgia and then bludgeoning Appalachian State. I feel like Clemson's record has the potential to be very scary when they come in here, because especially seeing Florida State turn into what they've turned into, they are probably, they could be a team that could have 8, maybe 9 wins coming into this game in late on in the year. I don't think they'll be, at that point in time, 10-1. I think they'll probably trip up a couple times since then, but I think their record may make them seem a little bit scarier. I still am not completely convinced they're that much better of a team than they were a year ago. I think they're going to benefit from the ACC not being as strong as it was at times last year, which, again, could just make them look a little bit scarier than maybe they actually are. But, again, Carolina didn't get blown out by them last year. If you don't fumble on that first play of the game and hand them a free touchdown, then we're talking about, keeping them off the board as far as touchdowns go. And who knows what happens in that game then. So, that's another team that I'm intrigued to kind of see as the season develops, to see if they've gotten much better than a season ago, because I've not seen that up to this point so far this season. So, again, that's just kind of running through game by game. Again, you're not going to be favored against Ole Miss or Alabama, likely not against Missouri or teams like that. And, look, if I'm sitting here saying right now, do I think Carolina's going to beat Ole Miss and Alabama? I wouldn't pick them today. Could they show me something in the next couple of weeks that could change my opinion? Sure. But as I've said, when you have defense playing, especially pass rush, like South Carolina's has, you're going to have a chance. Again, I don't think you look at these games as like, well, there's absolutely no way South Carolina can win that. You're always going to have a chance, especially for a team like Alabama. If they make mistakes like they did against South Florida, I think South Carolina has the ability to capitalize on those mistakes better than a South Florida team could. But all in all, certainly feeling better where we sit right now at 2-1 with the potential to go 3-1 this upcoming weekend for how the rest of the schedule pans out. And a lot of people around the country, as far as national pundits, when you talk about bowl projections and stuff like that, pretty much all of them are picking South Carolina to be in the bowl games now. So there's a lot of confidence this team should, at the very least, get to that 6-win mark, which a lot of people weren't confident in going into the season. So that perception of South Carolina is changing, and the outlook on the schedule is certainly feeling a little bit better at this point in time from what we've seen so far through 3 games. Quick reminder, Sips and Sounds, the unlimited sampling of over 40 brands of local and national craft beers, wines, seltzers, and spirits. Live performances by Ken and Drew of Sister Hazel and Dazer and the Donovan Twins. Coming up Saturday, September the 28th. You can get your unlimited tasting wristbands now at sipsandsoundscola.com. That's at sipsandsoundscola.com. Of course, one team South Carolina is not playing this year is the University of Florida for the first time in basically since they've joined the SEC 30 years ago. The fans down there in Gainesville, not feeling great. Their rival fans in Tallahassee, also not feeling great. Which fan base would you rather be a part of right now? Things are not going well in the state of Florida, and we'll dive into that and what the outlook for both programs is coming up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head, along with you here on your Wednesday. I asked the question, what team would you rather be a fan of right now, Florida or Florida State? Because the eyes of college football are on the state of Florida for all the wrong reasons at this moment. Both programs are kind of disasters, but in much different ways. The pain of this season, I think, is a lot worse on Florida State because the expectations were set so high leading up to the season. This is a team that won the ACC, went 13-0 through the first 13 games they played last year. And again, the loss to Georgia in the bowl game is, a different kind of thing. So many players out and all that kind of stuff. But the expectation going into the year is like, okay, Florida State should be able to dominate the ACC once again, win double-digit games. If not win the conference, be good enough to make their way in the college ball playoff. Where again, being undefeated and a conference champion, you can't get left out this time. And they've shown you nothing through the first 3 weeks. But the pain as far as the future outlook of a program is a lot worse at Florida because this isn't just a one-year issue. There's a foundational problem with what's happening in Gainesville as opposed to Tallahassee. Like, Mike Norvell is not on the hot seat right now. I know as bad as this season's gone so far, nobody's realistically saying, well, Mike Norvell should probably be fired after this year. Like, you can't forget what last year was. I mean, this dude has put together a couple of good seasons these past couple of years at Florida. They've obviously built something that's not off to a great start for this season so far, but I think they will eventually win a couple games. For the most part, people have punched on the season, and it's very clear they just don't have the right players right now. Keep in mind, 10 guys got drafted from Florida State last year, and this team is nowhere near as talented as that team was a season ago. As I mentioned, Mike Norvell's gone 23-4 his past 2 years with an ACC title and what should have been a trip to the college football playoff. He's been the same coach there. All of his assistants have remained the same. Nothing has changed except for the guys on the field. And again, it's just very clear they don't have nearly as good of players, namely a quarterback. You saw when Jordan Travis got hurt at the end of last season, and this was the big reason for why the committee kept him out of the playoffs, they didn't have anything good behind him at quarterback. And it's very clear that they don't have anything good at quarterback in general now with DJU and the guys behind him because that position has been woeful throughout this entire season so far. And it's not going to get any better. Like DJU is in, year 5, 6 of his college career. He's as good as he's going to get. You're not going to be able to magically flip a switch and suddenly turns into Superman for, the next 9 games of the season or whatever. Like, it's bad. They don't have a quarterback this year. They're not going to have a quarterback this year. And as we know in college football these days, especially, if you don't have a good quarterback, you're not going to be able to be very successful. But that's an easy fix. Florida State continues to recruit well. Florida State, very active in the transfer portal. If they rebounded and were 10-2 a season from now, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, wow, that's really shocking, because, again, they've shown you this is more kind of a one-year blip on the radar than the beginning of this, long downturn where Florida State is never going to be relevant again for the next, 10 years. Florida, on the other hand, is a mystery going forward. By the way, Florida State getting back to the top of the ACC is not that big of a challenge because the league from top to bottom is not that deep. Florida, on the other hand, is a lot more of a mystery going forward. And it's not a case of if Billy Napier is going to get fired, it's when, right? Like, if they would have fired him on Monday after getting dominated by Texas A&M and their backup quarterback, Marcel Reed, this past weekend, I wouldn't have been shocked. It seems like they're scrounging up the money for the buyout. So it's coming down the pipeline. And, if they lose the Dan Mullen Bowl this weekend in Mississippi State, maybe it happens this upcoming Monday. Or maybe they let him ride out the season and just wait to pay him off in November or December or whatever it may be. It's coming. He's not going to be the coach there in 2025. I can say that with a lot of confidence. And the weird thing is, you look at what Florida's done in his time there. They've been a routinely top 20 team in recruiting. They've been very active in the transfer portal. They have a very supportive fan base, and now that they've gotten all the collective stuff straightened out, it seems like their NIL situation's pretty good. It should never get this bad. And this isn't all necessarily on Billy Napier. The bulk of it is, if you ask a lot of people down there in Florida, they turn their attention to the administration. There's no faith that Scott Strickland is going to be able to make the right decision when they do fire Billy Napier, because it seems like he hasn't made the best decision in the 2 hires that he's made so far. People that remember, he was at Mississippi State, comes over to Florida, ends up hiring Dan Mullen, his buddy, to come back home to Florida. And yeah, they had a moment where they, won the SEC East, played for the SEC championship back in 2020, but it very quickly went sour with Dan Mullen, who was clearly not committed to building the program going forward because he had no interest in recruiting during the season. And that created the situation, the mess that they had with Napier coming in as the head coach. And look, Scott Strickland has been Napier's biggest defender because I think he knows that if Napier goes, well, he might be on the chopping block too. But if he stays around, there seems to be no faith from the people down there in Gainesville that he's going to make the right decision to hire whoever the next head coach is going to be. So it kind of seems like, for them at least, this is going to be a repeated cycle. And as opposed to what Florida State is dealing with in the ACC, where, all right, we just got to get our roster back together and we should be able to be competitive in the ACC again next year and the years going forward after that. The SEC has just gotten a whole lot tougher. It's already been the toughest league in college football for a long time, but now you add in Texas, you add in an Oklahoma team that's heading in the right direction. Like, you can't just suddenly go from being at the bottom of the SEC to really even being in the middle ground overnight. Like, that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of recruiting. By the way, Florida, if Billy Napier gets fired, I imagine there's a lot of players are going to transfer out. So what talent they do have on the team is probably going to be gutted by countless programs around the country. Like, it's truly likely going to be a rebuild and start over, which is just going to take years and years and years for whoever that next head coach is. The outlook is not bright for the Florida program. And look, most of you listening as well, I don't like Florida. I've never been a fan of Florida. Like, they've always been looked at as a rival. I don't want them to succeed necessarily, but for what that program once was, as one of the best programs in college football, they've fallen so far. And I don't know any time in the near future if they ever get back to that. It's truly an interesting, it's like, I guess it's morbid curiosity, right? Like, how could a program so good fall this far in, a decade and a half, roughly, right? And again, I don't see any signs of them clawing their way back up. And it just continues to be a you-know-what show week in and week out with this Napier team that shows no signs of getting better. So, again, the eyes of college football are on the state of Florida for all the wrong reasons. And the dynamic between what's happening in Gainesville and what's happening in Tallahassee is very fascinating to me, because two bad programs in two very, very different places. Again, Mississippi State this upcoming weekend for Florida, and then Cal, who's surprised a lot of people this year in their first year in the ACC so far, taking on Florida State, where, again, I expect both these programs to continue to trend in the wrong direction. It is Wednesday. Means we could talk a little bit of racing with Jen Jensen coming up next from the early game as we recap the second race of NASCAR's 2024 playoffs. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here in the game.
and it's shades of Keselowski and Ambrose all over again. Buescher gets on the inside of SVG and says, you pushed me around earlier, I'm going to give it back. Incredible on this final lap. Van Gisbergen's only got one real shot left at it, maybe two. Thinks about it into turn 6. Did Buescher save the best to last, or has Van Gisbergen got a little payback? He gets wide, he loses it almost, he has to gather it up, but he can't do it. Chris Buescher wins at the Glen in the most spectacular style.
Welcome back in Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Time to talk some racing with Jen Jensen from the early game. That was the call on Sunday on the USA Network. Lee Diffie detailing a very exciting final lap between Chris Buescher and Shane Van Gisbergen. I've already loved Lee Diffie for the work he's done in the past, but my goodness, did he knock that final lap out of the park?
Oh, my gosh, did he not? I was just going to say the exact same thing. How could you not love to listen to a race call by Lee Diffie? He's just so good and so versatile in different types of motorsports. And, yeah, it was exciting to listen to.
And the lap itself was already amazing. You had two very talented guys, Chris Buescher and Shane Van Gisbergen, of course, coming over from Supercars that always finds his way to the front at these road courses in the NASCAR Cup Series. Will go full time next year and is certainly going to do a lot of damage in that 88 car for Team Trackhouse. But I thought that last lap was a master class in what good hard racing should be. So I go back to a couple weeks ago where we had the Austin Dillon controversy where, he dumps Joe Logano and right hooks Denny Hamlin and, basically wins in the worst possible way and ends up getting the playoff eligibility revoked, because of it. I thought what Buescher and Van Gisbergen did on that last lap on Sunday was the epitome of what racing at the highest level of stock cars should be.
Absolutely. And nobody's dumping anybody. It's hard racing. SVG kind of, bobbled a little bit there in the bus stop, and that was just enough to get himself, a little bit turned, and Buescher was able to take advantage. I mean, a little bumping going through there, but that's racing. It's not just, hey, I'm going to dump you, and then that way I can get through. Like, it was finesse, it was timed, it was brilliant.
For Chris Buescher, who did end up missing out of the playoffs, funny enough, by literally inches, going back to his loss but to Kansas with Kyle Larson there back in the spring. That win would have obviously put him in the playoffs, not to mention several other times where he came close to winning. I don't know if it takes all the sting away of not being included in the playoffs and being able to run for a championship, but definitely a feel-good win for that 17 team that's come close so many times this year.
Oh, my gosh, yeah, I think it was, and just kind of reiterated that, he's a force to be reckoned with, and I just think if he keeps on the current trajectory, I just don't see that we don't see him in the playoffs in another year. I just think he's good, and he's really continued to hone his craft.
And, looking ahead to next year, as I mentioned, Van Gisbergen going full-time in the Cup Series with Team Trackhouse. And he's coming along on the ovals and short tracks and super speedways and stuff like that. But this dude is an absolute monster at these road courses. And there's no reason to think that he could not realistically, as a Cup rookie, come in and win 2 or 3 of these things.
Oh, my gosh. It's going to be fun to watch him. And I'm sure if if most of the others in the field aren't worrying about him, they should be, because how he wins a race, like one of his very first NASCAR races, like when he won Chicagoland, like that or the Chicago race. Excuse me. He is definitely a force to be reckoned with, and I think it's going to be so much fun to have him in the series next year. I really do.
It's a rare instance where we're talking about a playoff race, and we're not really talking about drivers in the playoffs because, of course, Chris Buescher didn't make the playoffs. SVG, not a full-time guy. But when it comes to the actual playoff drivers, a lot of them ran into problems over the weekend. Denny Hamlin getting caught up with an incident on lap 1. Ryan Blaney having to get parked after a first lap incident when his tires went flat, and there was an issue with what the NASCAR rule says about being towed back to the garage, where he ended up walking away with not a lot of points. Brad Keselowski and William Byron ended up getting tangled up in a wreck late in the race. A lot of attrition for playoff guys on Sunday at Watkins Glen.
It was insane. When you look at the top 10, and there's only 2 playoff drivers who were in the top 10 of this race, that's something right there. And when you're looking at who is below the cutoff line, You've got Hamlin below, Kozlowski, Truex Jr. Yeah, it's Bristol. I don't think any of them were expecting Bristol to be quite as important as Bristol will now be.
No, probably not. That being said, I mean, Hamlin 6 points out. That's very doable. In fact, I think Hamlin's got a really good shot at going out there and winning at Bristol once again, as he's done the past 2 times. Keselowski, that's 12 points is something you can make up in stages. When you get to Truex at 14, that's a little more of a stretch, but certainly not impossible. I think Harrison Burton's the only one that really goes into this weekend on Saturday night saying, okay, he's in an absolute must-win. And, of course, that 21 team just has not shown the speed at most tracks to be able to go up there and get stage points and stuff like that. So I think some things are really going to have to fall their way if they want to walk out of there advancing in the playoffs.
No, and I don't disagree with you on that one. I mean, and Hamlin is historically really good at Bristol, so I'm not worried about him making his way back in. But again, a lot of things that happen at Watkins Glen, which is the nature of a road course, you just don't know because, again, Bristol's just another animal all on its own.
I think perhaps the bigger story when looking at the playoff standings is looking at the top 5. Of course, Joey Logano's already advanced through with his win at Atlanta last week, but I would not have picked Austin Cindric, Alex Bowman, and Daniel Suarez to be sitting in the top 5 of the playoffs after 2 races of the first round.
No, and Austin Cindric especially, yes, he has come along, but I sure did not see him. I figured that he would kind of be dancing around that cut line. I was not anticipating, but he's really kind of come in the second half of the season. He's come into his own a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, he's a guy that came in with not really a lot of playoff points, had the one win at Gateway earlier in the year that did kind of fall into his lap with his teammate having the problem that Blaney did with running out of gas. But hats off to the 2 team. They obviously were very dominant last week in Atlanta. Didn't end up picking up the win, but picked up a lot of points. And then he's very good on the road courses and had a good day out there Sunday. So doing what they need to do to advance. Look, I'm not going to pick them to be in the Final Four or anything like that, but they could definitely be one of the more impressive teams of this playoff.
I think it's going to be fun to watch them. And have you really thought about who you think is in the Final Four yet?
So it's really funny. My buddy and I, we do a racing podcast, and before the season, we picked our Final Four, and I'll pull this up right here because my Final Four, I think, has for the most part gone out the window. Let me see. I picked before the season started. All right. Let's see. I picked Kyle Busch to be in my Final Four. That's not going to happen.
Oh,
Kyle Larson, okay. Tyler Reddick, and Chris Buescher. So 2 of my guys that I picked didn't even make the playoffs. There's still a chance for Larson and Buescher, certainly, but my thoughts before the season ended up being way off.
Wow. Those are some really actually very well thought out picks, as a possibility. Of course, who knew Kyle Busch was going to have a season like he's had? Yeah, sure. He started to bring it on at the end, but again, didn't help him get into the playoffs. And what a run for him. I mean, my gosh, he had like a string of 4 top 10s and then Watkins Glen. Like Watkins Glen, I think if everybody could just erase that, they would be in really good shape because what a terrible race for most people who are any kind of contenders and especially for the playoffs.
Well, it's been an entertaining first 2 races. Of course, Atlanta last weekend and then Watkins Glen this past weekend and Saturday night at Bristol, one of the premier races of the entire season, the Bristol night race. We saw a wild race back in the spring. Thought the tire fall off, and now you add in the elements of the playoffs and guys having to go out there and knowing they likely have to win, like Harrison Burton, to advance through. We could be in for a good deal of chaos on Saturday night as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm kind of glad that they're sticking with the tire plan like they had in the spring. And instead of, messing with the option tire, I'm kind of glad like we saw good fall off. I think it's going to be really good racing. Nighttime racing, I think it always is fun with Bristol. So having that in the playoffs and the last part before, we lose 4 people in the rounds, I think it's going to be a fun night.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly looking forward to it and should be a fun one. That'll be running concurrently with the South Carolina football game, so may have to catch the replay of that a little bit later on.
I know. I'm thinking I'm going to maybe be doing a little streaming, a little dipping here and there while we're watching the game on Saturday night.
Certainly going to be a busy Saturday, and I can't wait to see who advances through and makes it on to the round of 12, which we'll be able to talk about coming up next weekend. Appreciate it as always, Jen.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thanks, Tyler.
It's Jen Jensen from the Early Game Talking Racing as we do each and every Wednesday here on the Extra Point. It's always a busy week during football season. In fact, talking to Jen, tomorrow she's going to be out with Jay and Elijah at CHW Cabinetry on Two Notch Road in Lexington from 3 until 6 as they'll be broadcasting the post-game show out there. And then tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, you have Carolina Calls with Coach Beamer and Todd Ellis as well as they get you set for the Akron game coming up this weekend. I'm going to pose a question to you. Do you like South Carolina's current uniforms? Saturday night, we're going to be treated to some throwback threads that I'm very excited about. But in general, when you look at South Carolina's uniforms, are you a fan of them? We'll talk about that coming up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on the game as we start to turn our sights ahead of this upcoming weekend to see South Carolina taking on Akron. And you may have forgotten about this. It was announced over the summer, but South Carolina going to be wearing some throwback threads this upcoming weekend. Let's hit cut number 17 here, Dave. Coach Beamer was asked about that yesterday during his presser.
Yeah, very little. Larry Waters, our head of equipment, came to me. It was probably about this time last year, David, and showed me pictures of, hey, Under Armour University wants to do a throwback game. This is what they're going with. Are you good with these uniforms? And if it was this time of year, we were probably getting ready to play Mississippi State, I think, about this time last year. And I think he came to me like on a Monday or Tuesday night. And at that point, I could really give two what's about what uniform we were going to be wearing in 2024. So I think I looked at it and I said, that's cool. Let's roll. And then I didn't really think about it again until he showed me the helmet back in July, I believe. Here's what the helmet's going to look like, and here's the uniform, and here's the pants. And then I think we put something on social media back in August. Luke walked in our team meeting room and showed the team what it looked like. So to answer your question, I didn't have a lot of input other than just looking at it and saying that looks great. But our players are excited, and it's great to be able to honor that era of Gamecock football with that uniform, which will be pretty cool.
For anybody that's listened to me here on the game for any length of time, I'm a big uniform person. I can talk about uniforms, jerseys, helmets, and all that kind of stuff all day long. These are really neat. I was excited when they got announced back in the summer for this game. They are throwbacks to the Heisman season for George Rogers back in 1980. So you have, I don't know if there's a different name for that garnet. It definitely seems like maybe kind of a lighter shade of garnet on the uniforms, or maybe it's just the lighting that I'm looking at for this picture. But you have the old school Carolina uniform, says Carolina across the chest. You have the block numbers, which I'm a really big fan of. I like South Carolina's uniforms overall. I think obviously the color scheme's good. I think you got a really good look, with the white helmet a lot of the time, as well as, the black jersey, the garnet jersey, and all that kind of stuff. The one thing that I think personally bothers me about Carolina uniforms is the number font. I think block numbers are superior in every single way. A very cool, classic, old school kind of look that you're getting with these uniforms this upcoming weekend against Akron. And then you have the stars on the helmet as well, with the two stripes down, or is that three stripes down the middle? Let me see here. Take a better look at it. No, it's three stripes down the middle. So you have black, garnet, and then another black stripe and two stars on either side of that. Again, throwing back to George Rogers in the days back in the early 80s. But these look really cool. I know the uniform and stuff is a hot button topic around a lot of Carolina fans, and I think that has to do mainly with the apparel provider being Under Armour. I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fans of them. Nike's kind of dominating the college uniform landscape, and more so now as Auburn just signed a deal with Nike starting here in a couple years, and it seems like Under Armour is slowly kind of backing its way out of college sports, with the exception of the big deal they signed with Notre Dame to continue to be with them for the next, I think, 10 years there. But I know a lot of people in this fan base, from what I've gathered so far, talking to people and listening to feedback and stuff like that, would very much like to see them maybe switch to Nike at some point down the line, and that contract is coming up here in the next couple of years. It'll be interesting to see what they do. But I asked what your opinions of the uniforms are. I had a couple people weigh in on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Mike says, he says, satisfied overall. I'd like to see some color rush style uniforms from time to time, like an all solid color from head to toe, particularly like the all gray Kentucky had this past Saturday. And of course, with the garnet lettering and numbers in the place of the blue. In a way, I mean, Carolina does kind of do the head to toe thing sometimes. I mean, when you're on the road, if you're wearing all white, that's kind of a head-to-toe white thing. When they have the white pants there, I think the all-black look is good. And for those that have listened to me on here as well, I do not like when teams that don't have black in their color scheme wear black uniforms. But Carolina, of course, garnet and black. It makes perfect sense there. So I think for me at least, they kind of satisfy the whole one color thing when they do kind of do that from head to toe. So I think that's pretty neat. Game Fox weighs in and says, I would like to make the block C on the helmet bigger. Love the helmet that they are wearing this weekend. Rest of the uniforms are great. Excuse me, that's from Bill from Hartsville. Excuse me there. It looks like I guess the block C is bigger on this one compared to what it normally is. Yeah, I would say it looks like it takes up a whole lot more of the helmet, actually. So a bigger presence for the logo on the side of the helmet. And I think that's pretty cool. Looking at it next to the current helmet, it is kind of surprising how smaller that the logo is now. So I can agree with you on that. I definitely think it pops a little bit more when you have that logo so big on the side of the helmet. But all in all, I think the uniforms are fine. Like I said, I think if I were to change one thing, it would just be the block numbers that we're going to see this weekend, because I just think that presents a whole lot more better overall and kind of cleaner look. We're talking about uniforms, but very cool. I'm sure they're selling these things. So if you want to get your hands on them, you can certainly do that. And it's going to look really cool in Williams-Brice Stadium on Saturday night under the lights, hopefully for a very comfortable win over the Akron Zips. So we'll continue to talk about this game as well as assess where this team stands 3 games into the season with Wes and Chris as we dive into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, coming up next as we navigate you through your Wednesday here on The Game. 11 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It is Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Towerhead, West Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you. I feel like, guys, we've said all that needs to be said about LSU this past weekend. We've made our cases about the penalties and everything like that. It's now time to start slowly turning our attention to Akron this upcoming weekend as Carolina looks to improve to 3-1, and wrap up the month of September, as many would have hoped they would do at the very least before the season started. If you were told anybody, hey, if you go 3-1 in September with 3-point loss to LSU, they would have taken that in a heartbeat. Now, obviously, living in the moment and knowing how we got there is certainly a little bit of a different story, but still well on track to accomplish all the goals that we'd set out for them prior to the season.
Yeah, I think you said it, man. If you said 3-1, split the 2 SEC games, even, if you said, hey, man, the defense is fast, athletic, Sellers already showing signs of progress, and you're 3-1 despite him missing pretty much 3 quarters, you would have signed. Now, yeah, in the moment you're like, I think that's why that one's so tough, is you really feel like you were right there, and not even so much, in my opinion, the penalties. Like, the penalties have gotten obviously a ton of airtime and social media time, but also, to me, it's just, hey, if you just don't do this little thing or that little thing to cost you, then, you're sitting in the top 25 right now and undefeated.
Yeah, it is tough to swallow. And, maybe if the roles are reversed, I don't know if people would feel better or worse if they would have gone on the road, lost to Kentucky, and beat LSU at home, right? Like, I think we all said before the season, and the reason that it is a tough pill to swallow is exactly what you said, Wes, because you see you right there. If LSU had, come in here, gone up and down the field, people would have been mad for a different reason. I think your confidence in this team is probably actually pretty high right now, like much higher than it is typically after a loss. We can go back to week 1. After a loss, in the week-to-week, every week is a season nature of 2024 college athletics, you lose a game, you might as well not play the rest of the year. And that happens at every school. I'm not picking on Gamecock fans. That's part of the fun of it, the emotional, it's kind of an emotional roller coaster, right? I think people's confidence in this team after a loss has actually raised. You don't see that a lot. You don't see you lose a football game and everybody's like, man, I feel pretty good right now. The reason people are mad was for an entirely different reason, the stuff that we've already talked about. So your goals are still there. You're not 2-2, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
You're not, or not 2-2. You're not 1-2. You're not 3-0, which is where you would love to be. But you have some confidence, I think, and you got your goals in front of you.
As we look ahead to this weekend, we touched on this a little bit yesterday, but we wanted to see what Beamer was going to say in reference to Lenore Sellers' injury. And he said kind of what we expected, like, hey, he feels good. He says he's good to go. We'll see what ends up happening later on this weekend. But as we talked about yesterday when we were out at Firehouse Subs, it's a fine line. Like, yes, Lenore Sellers gives you the best opportunity at quarterback. That's the reason why he's your starter. But if you're anything less than probably 95% going into this weekend, you do run the risk of having a long and lingering injury if he re-aggravates that ankle for Ole Miss and Alabama and these very tough games you have coming up in the next couple weeks here. So how Carolina manages the quarterbacks this weekend is going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I do like how so Chris, let's back off even more a little bit. Chris mentioned years ago that Florida game the other day, how South Carolina had a big win on the road. Then the entire game was sort of looking back on that next week. It was all anybody talked about was the penalties and all Carolina got, didn't get a fair shot, blah, 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 blah. So it really felt to me like that week. I want to say South Carolina had a road game with Tennessee the next week. And you could just feel it that so much of the attention that week had been on the officiating. Like, it really was not much, in my recollection was about South Carolina. And, hey, maybe you also have to play better. So I really think, especially, like we've had the opportunity to watch Shane Beamer as a first-year head coach and then grow into now a fourth-year head coach. I really think he has handled this very well in terms of we're not going to ignore the issues with the officiating. Like, we're going to be honest, hey, we sent in some plays because I think that's what your fan base wanted to hear, and maybe to an extent that's what your players wanted to hear. But I don't think you've heard excuses. I think it's been, hey, we have to make these plays ourselves. We can't put the refs in that position to make those calls. So I come out of this past week actually thinking that is something we talked about yesterday too. South Carolina feels to me like a confident team. It feels to me like a team saying, I believe they were confident in the first place, but saying, okay, we really can compete with anyone in that game. So I don't look at it like a heartbreak that is lingering, me personally. And I really like that, yeah, the fan base has talked about the penalties and that's what you expect. But it doesn't really feel like South Carolina as a team, as a program, as a coaching staff is still talking about that. I remember going into like Thursday of that upcoming game, after that Florida game, it was still all anybody was talking about was and you just kind of had this feeling that it had lingered way too long, and then Carolina goes to Knoxville, if I'm remembering correctly, and just did not play well at all, especially in the second half. I think it was a good game in the first half, and they just got hammered in the second half. So I appreciate the way things have been handled as far as this goes, and getting back to Sellers, and I promise this is all connected to an extent. If you're Shane Beamer, you're not going to say on Tuesday leading into the game, you're not going to be like, well, hey, if we have to, we'll just sit Sellers because it's just Akron. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to put that out into the world. And so internally, do you maybe have a little bit of like, all right, guys, if he's less than 90% or something, that's the number I keep going back to, 95%. Like, if he's 100%, it's not even a question. You're playing him because he's a young guy that needs the reps.
Yep.
But if there's any lingering aspects, for one, I think because you have the bye week next, so you have an entire other week you can tack on for him to stay off of that foot, stay off that ankle, you got to take advantage of that. Two, I think there's some advantages to getting Robbie snaps in this offense and letting him keep going to throw in case you do need him in some big moments in the future. Do we see some Davis Bevel? Do we see some Luke Doty, Dante Reno? I don't know. You would love for this thing to play out like that Furman game last year where you ultimately were able to sort of empty out the bench. That's actually where we got our first
Sellers
extensive
debut.
look at Sellers. So in a perfect world, even if he's like good to go and cleared, in a perfect world, maybe you score a couple touchdowns early. Even if Sellers did play, score a couple touchdowns early, and then say, all right, we're going to give him the rest of the game.
Yeah, I looking back, you were right. That 2019, real quick on that point, Carolina did go play Tennessee next week, lost by 20, and then they only won one more game the rest of the year. They beat Vandy. That was the year they lost to App State at home. They went to A&M, got blasted. Played Clemson at home, season. Got blasted. Right, you end up 4-8. So the whole can't let it beat you twice thing, and I agree with you, Wes. Like if you're looking for evidence, sometimes you see online if a coach mentions something that happened, people are like making an excuse. No, he has not made any excuses after the game. Like he said way more on Sunday than on Saturday. His posture right after the game on Saturday was to come in and say 13 penalties isn't going to win you a football game. He put it all on them. Meanwhile, Brian Kelly won, and he's talking about the block punt, so it's kind of, and that's not the only thing Brian Kelly talked about in fairness, but he went even farther, and he was the winning coach. So I do think he's done a really good job, Shane Beamer has, of explaining, answering questions, and kind of threading that needle. But, you heard it from the players yesterday. They're not. Mazio Bennett talked about his phantom penalty a little bit, and Maurice Brown talked about his, non-call on the play that Brian Kelly referenced on the block punt. They all talked about it. Kyle Kennard, how do you move on from that? Go practice, So, Kyle's a guy that, is 37 years old at this point. It seems like, he's been around. And so I really think this team is in the right place. Now, they're going to have to go out and play well the rest of the year, obviously, to be able to win some games. But I don't think this is something that's lingering. On the quarterback deal, I feel the same way. I mean, if Sellers isn't healthy, you not only have the opportunity to go and rest him for this game, but you can stack more days on top of that, make sure he's right. And you would like to think you can go out and win this game, if you're playing somebody else regardless. But Beamer's not going to come out and say that.
Yeah. You have the opportunity, and again, this is not an SEC game, so you don't have to put out the mandated injury report this week leading up to Akron, so you can play this a little closer to the vest as opposed to the other games you're going to be playing the rest of the year in conference. And it's worth noting, he did mention yesterday when asked what the contingency plans would be if Sellers couldn't go, that it's a competition between Ashford and Bevel this week. Of course, Ashford has gotten the nod this entire time as being the backup, but I do think it's intriguing that, especially considering the fact that Ashford isn't that great of a thrower at this point in time, that Bevel could maybe factor into this if they do end up going that way this weekend.
Yeah, I would fully expect Ashford to start if not Sellers, but I do think it surely sounded like you maybe see some Bevel this week. I wondered, would they consider putting him in at the end of the game this past week when it went from, hey, you're still trying to run the ball and run clock to, hey, we're going to have to throw the ball and go down the field. Now, that would be a tough spot to put a guy into, considering he hasn't played this year. So I think for South Carolina, you go into this game, did y'all catch also Beamer saying, hey, Akron, they play two quarterbacks at one time.
Yep.
We might steal something from that thought process. So I don't know if that meant lining up Lenoris and Robbie in the backfield at the same time or something different. But, I think for Carolina, you are going to have probably a couple of different plans for this weekend. Of course, one being, hey, can Sellers go? But this is still a young quarterback. Practice matters. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what you're doing in a lead up to a game is you're working on your specific plays. You're obviously working on kind of your go-to plays. But you're working on specifics for that week, for that game plan, for that defense you're going to face. So missing time, it obviously matters. And, do you maybe just go into this thing and say, look, it's at this point, it's Wednesday. I don't know what all Sellers did this morning, but, if he hasn't been practicing much, do you just go with your veteran and obviously maybe get Davis Bevel ready as well to go out there and throw the ball around a little bit and then just kind of get to the bye week? Because, hey, ankle injuries, man, those things can linger. And really, you don't know how it's going to feel until you just see how it feels. Like, what does the, how swollen is it still? Mm-hmm. Can he walk on it? Can he run on it? I mean, it's a very quick turnaround in these games. And, I know Sellers, I'm sure Sellers wants to play, but he wanted to go back in the game
right
on Saturday, which you respect that as a competitor. But then ultimately, it's one of those things where he's doing what he wants to do. He's saying what he feels like he needs to say, but it's going to be up to the adults in the room to decide if that's the right move.
Kickoff Saturday night against Akron, 7:30. Pregame coverage starting here on the game at 2:30 with myself and Terry Ford for Gamecocks Game Day. We'll dive into a conversation we were having yesterday, evaluating this team position group by position group as we are a fourth of the way through the regular season. That's coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
Been enjoying all the college football action out at my home, and you can do the same. My setup was provided by Integrated Media. They mounted our TV, make sure I got our internet signal straight. Upstairs, another mounted TV, got the video games on a switcher for the kids. The adults, if we ever get time, might dabble in that a little bit. They can do any of that at your home, plus way more. You don't have to use the big box stores if you're looking for a new television, if you want something mounted, if you're looking for Sonos wireless speakers, a sound bar, man cave upgrade, outdoor space, patio, screen porch. They can do it all for you. Go check out some inspiration photos, get some ideas of some cool stuff you could do this season. Integrated Media Columbia on Instagram or on Facebook. Give Michael and Nathan, their team at Integrated Media, a call. 803-948-8327. Local service. They do a great job. IntegratedMediaInc.com.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyrod West Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on this Wednesday. We did this yesterday for the offense, and we were out at Firehouse Subs, going position group by position group. after a 3-game sample size and assessing if they're better, worse, or right on track with where we thought they'd be so far this season. We'll kind of do this with defense now, and we'll start off with, I'll group them together, defensive line as well as edge, which, of course, edge has gone out there and really set the world on fire through the first couple games of the season so far. And South Carolina currently ranking second in the nation in sacks with 12 so far this year, highlighted by what Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart have done so far. And I think we knew this group was going to be good, but I think most people would say it's probably better than we thought, at least through 3 games.
Yeah, I think we knew all offseason that they were going to be, you would say, much improved, and that was kind of our expectation. But looking at what it's actually become, like kind of this dominant group that even had success, because I think you saw, all right, well, they dominated ODU. Then you're like, not only did they win some battles, they pretty much dominated Kentucky as well and just took over that game. So each week, I think we've learned maybe they're a little bit better than we thought from the week before. Again, even with the high expectations. And then so this past week, you're sitting there saying, all right, let's see what they can do against LSU. And, man, I mean, they won a lot of battles against LSU as well. You were never going to just dominate that LSU front. Like, those guys are projected first-round picks for a reason, but you had a lot of success. LSU had to completely change their plan based on your success up front and do some different things to try to slow down the rush, do some different things to try to get the ball out faster, motioning tight ends in to max protect when they thought you were bringing pressure. Like, there was a lot going on with this game where South Carolina was able to kind of still, I would say, enforce their will up front for the most part. So, yeah, I think you got to say that it was better than even our high expectations.
Yeah, going back and looking at some stuff from that game, I think you just give Garrett Nussmeier so much credit because, I mean, a lot of the plays that he made in that game, he's got people in his face. He's got people diving at him. I mean, he just made some incredibly gutsy, big-time throws, different arm angles like Wes pointed out yesterday. You know, I don't think there are many quarterbacks who have that type of performance in the face of that pressure. So that's last game. Now, the overall sample size has been great as well, and I think you can break that down individually or as a group. Dylan Stewart, I think we knew he was a big-time prospect, and he was one of those guys that actually had, as a true freshman, you know, sometimes we put too high expectations on 5 stars as freshmen. We actually had some expectations of he's going to be able to come in and help them as a pass rusher. He's been better than anticipated. Kyle Kennard has been probably, I would make a strong argument, he's been the most disruptive player on the entire defense. We thought he would be quite good for them. He's been a star for the defense. And I think you can go on and on about this front. So, you know, one thing, playing the run, when you play the style that they play, I think it does leave you a little bit vulnerable. So some of it's maybe stylistic, philosophical, maybe not quite as good there, but overall, even having heightened expectations, this group has surpassed that.
Yeah, certainly when you compare to what they were a year ago, which, again, pass rush was just non-existent for a lot of last season. That certainly taking a step in the right direction. Go to linebackers next. Look, we had Debo Williams coming back this year. We saw Bam Martin-Scott emerge for the ends last season. Plenty of reason to be excited about what Demetrius Knight, Bengali Kamara, guys like that were bringing in via the transfer portal. This one, I don't know if I want to go with better or right on track. I'd probably lean to kind of right on track with where I thought they would be at this point in time. Because, again, what you're doing with pass rush is kind of more focused on the edge spot, and that's garnering most of the attention. But linebacker's been solid for the first 3 games.
Yeah, I would put it kind of right on track. I think if you it kind of depends on how closely you follow things. Like if you just are, hey, I remember the games last year and didn't really read much this offseason, and now, hey, here we are, let's go watch some games. You probably, it kind of depends on your own personal expectations. I think you probably go, hey, they're much improved. But I think if you hopefully listened to us and read our reporting, you would know that there's been some very high expectations for this linebacking group pretty much all offseason. And I thought they actually took a decent step forward at linebacker even last year. But, you were really counting on Mo Kaba to play a lot, and he's been hurt the last 2 seasons. I think that's really hurt them at that position the last 2 years. But bringing in Demetrius Knight, getting Debo Williams back, the emergence of Bam Martin-Scott at the end of last year, and, golly, Kamara, like this kid, he's flying all over the field as well. So I think you add in some even more depth with like a J.R. Johnson, who didn't really play on defense this past week, but I think against some teams, when you're not in like a dogfight of an SEC game, he's going to be mixed in there and give you some opportunities to get those other guys off the field. I think you got to like where this group is headed. Jaron Willis hasn't even seen the field. Like, that's another guy that has some talent to him, but these other players have just been really, really good. And so I think you got to like where that group is headed. I actually think there's even a little bit more upside to go. There's a couple of just barely misses, I think, on some plays. But, yeah, the more they play together, the better that group will get if they can stay healthy and as the year progresses, I think. And you're not going to have that, except for, maybe Debo, who just they have to, like, beg him to come off the field, I feel like. You're not going to have that season-long, you hope, wear and tear that maybe you had the last couple of years with those guys playing so many snaps.
Yeah, that's the thing that stuck out to me about the LSU game, looking over the snap count right now. Obviously, highly, highly competitive game, so very close game. So you're not going to maybe spread out the snaps as much as you would in other games. 4 guys played at linebacker, and so they were Debo, Bam Scott, D. Knight, and Gali Kamara. Looking at it, man, Debo Williams played 61 snaps, and I think they played 70. I think DQ Smith and OD Fortune played every snap, so that's 78 snaps. So Debo's not coming off the field a lot, and you start thinking about, I'm not saying this for sure, but later in the game, LSU's starting to pop some runs, start seeing some missed tackles. I'm looking at this thing going, I think D. Knight and Bengali Kamara have probably shown enough to, let's throw them out there another series or 2 in a game. And maybe that helps, Wes, with that next step that you were talking about, just being even more fresh. And Shane Beamer's alluded to that a couple times, like, hey, we want to find a way to get our guys rotated even more. I think we've started to see that more up front. Will that extend out to linebacker? So I say overall probably what we thought. But I'll admit, I had pretty decently high expectations for the linebacker group because of the depth that they added.
I was going to say, but God, it's hard to take Debo off the field.
It is. It's very hard. But 61 of 78 snaps. And I feel like the guys, like, man, Demetrius Knight, he looks good when he's in there.
Yeah, but Demetrius is out there alongside Debo a lot of times.
He
really,
is,
I think, how many did Bam play?
Bam was 40-something snaps.
Yeah, so, yeah. I think maybe getting Gali out there a little bit more.
Yeah.
Is your guy that you want to put on the field. And, he's the one of the 4 that played the least. So I think maybe getting him a few more snaps. I think you get in that just battle. And it's easy to be like, we ain't thinking about tomorrow. We're in an SEC just battlefield right now. It's easy to not think about next week or the week after that, considering where things are.
We'll wrap up our tour of the position groups with defensive backs as well as touch on some special teams. Come up next as the Gamecocks Digital Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along on your Wednesday on the game.
Our friends over at Krantz Cooling and Heating can take care of any of your home's HVAC needs. When we've had issues, problems, questions in the past, That's who I've called. My guy, Justin Krantz, general manager over at Krantz Cooling and Heating. Family owned and operated business since 1983. A lot of times with service businesses, it's hard to find someone you can trust, someone who has been out to someone that you know's home and done a really good job. That's what they've done for me. KrantzCooling.com. That's Krantz with a K, cooling with a K. Or you can give them a call at 803-672-3224. Customer service folks, very helpful. They can come out and give you a free second opinion if you got a coil leak. If you want to look at installing a mini split like they did at my home, in my garage, my mom's home, upstairs where it got a little too hot, they can do that for you too. KrantzCooling.com or 803-672-3224.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, West Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you. Here on your Wednesday on the game, hitting our final couple position groups here as we go throughout the entire team and assess where things stand after 3 games, a quarter of the way through the regular season. So a decent sample size to kind of make our assessments of what we've seen so far from South Carolina. Final group for the defense is DBs. This was a group coming into the year. We knew there was the battle at the other cornerback spot. You did have some veteran guys returning at the other places in the secondary. And so far through this year, they've only allowed a little over 50% completions. They've obviously done really good with takeaways, getting 5 total interceptions through the first 3 games of the season. That being said, I think you've only gone up against one, I'd say, prolific passing attack with LSU this past weekend. Obviously, what the what the front line of your defense was able to do against Kentucky really stifled Brock Vandegrift from having really any time to sit back there and throw. That allowed the secondary to have such a good day there. So I don't know if we know everything about this defense. Where would you kind of assess them on the scale of what we've seen so far?
Yeah, I would say about what we expected. I hate to keep going back to that answer, but a lot of times it's very easy to lose sight of rush and cover. And that basically means, hey, how quickly you can get to that quarterback is directly aligned with how your secondary is going to look. How many times did the secondary kind of get bashed on last year when you're going, well, hey, what if the pass rush gets there a half second earlier? And part of the reason they had to go to the 3-3-5 and why it was sort of successful for them last year was because the 4-2-5 is built on can you get pressure with not always just 4 rushers, but you've got to be able to get some pressure without bringing extra guys. And the edges have to be able to win battles. And for a good portion of last year, that just was not happening. So then, you have some long passes down the field. You have some plays that they're not really what you would call busts in the secondary. It's just the guy got open against you. Like you just got beat. But how long did the quarterback have to throw? You know what I mean? So I think some of the success this year for the secondary, yes, it is because you've been great up front. But a lot of the things that were attributed to the secondary last year were because just the absolute lack of pass rush last year. So the truth probably somewhere in the middle of all that. I think OD, OD had a couple of little tackling issues in the second half, but for the most part, I think OD has taken a big step forward just as a cover corner. I think Judge and Vicari have both done some good things on the other side. Jalen's been good at nickel. Eamon Worry, who was kind of my pick for preseason defensive MVP. I think he's had a good start to the year too, man. Like he's been involved in a lot of plays. Obviously has already had one touchdown that wasn't called back. He had the touchdown he's been a playmaker out there. So I like this group. I'm anxious to see how much they keep going. I'm also anxious to see, we've talked about this, are there some opportunities, are there some packages that maybe involve sliding Kilgore back to safety and getting another cover guy in there at nickel while playing some of these better passing teams? I'm looking at you, Ole Miss. That would be, with a bye week, that would be something I'd look hard at if I was South Carolina. Can you get just a little bit more diverse in terms of your options in the secondary? But, overall, it's been good. And I even think, I think DQ has gotten a bad rap from some people because of some high-profile misses. He also has made some plays for you.
Yeah, overall about what we thought, it just dawned on me. It's kind of funny. If at the end of the year, South Carolina has had like a really good year or a pretty good year, I feel like we're going to have to go back and amend some of it because something was going to have to be even better than we thought. Maybe it's just the defensive front. Yeah. Or maybe, some of the wide receivers end up being better or quarterback play like Sellers grows even more than we thought in year one. But you're right. I mean, Eamon Worry, I think he's done a really good job in zone coverage, and even in man. That was a question. I think that was where he needed to grow a little bit more going into this season. He's had 2 picks in zone coverage. Where he was right spot, right time, read the quarterback. If you go back and look at some of his metrics, PFF can just be a guide, but he's given up 4 catches this year, and 3 of them were against Old Dominion, of all teams. Gave up 1 reception last week and none against Kentucky. So he's been quite good in coverage. I think Carolina's got a little bit more stability at those DB spots this year. Now, obviously, your pass rush helps a ton. If you didn't have the pass rush, even if you had just a good pass rush, it's been really, really good. Some of these numbers would probably be not quite as rosy.
Yeah. Also leading the team in tackles, I think.
Yes, he's got, I think, 19 tackles so far.
Which is not It's not what you don't want a safety leading your team in tackles, but it does sort of say that he's been pretty active. I think.
has.
Last one here, we'll hit special teams as well, just kind of the group as a whole. Of course, Alex Herrera coming in as kicker for the first time, has missed a couple kicks, including the one that ended up, costing you the chance to go to overtime against LSU on Saturday. You have blocked a punt. You blocked an extra point. Kai Kroger's punts seem to be getting off pretty well. We talked about this the other day. It seems like Juju McDowell is primed to break off a return one of these days, seems to be coming ever closer to doing that. So I hate to round out with one thing that we've been saying the entire time, but probably about on track with where you expected it to be.
I'm going to give a little different answer. I think they've been a little bit better just because I love the Joe D hire. But, man, replacing Limbo, I don't care who you go get. Like, that is big shoes to fill. And also, guys, I was working on this little theory that in the transfer portal era, I think it's harder and harder to have good special teams. We saw South Carolina sort of slide back towards the mean a little bit, you would say, last year on special teams. How many great special teams units were built on having, some difference makers, whether it's like maybe a returner or a gunner, but the core of those special teams were built by your guys who maybe aren't playing a ton on offense or defense, but just love it at a place and stick around 2, 3, 4 years and learn all the little techniques and intricacies of playing special teams that the rest of us don't even notice. These days, you have so much roster churn. I feel like it's harder and harder to keep those guys on your roster. And so I wondered, like, with all the changes at all the special teams units, and of course replacing a Mitch Jeter, there were some questions there. Honestly, as good as Joe D is at scheming things up, so I'm going to say a little bit better. And even regardless of the miss by Herrera, that's a tough situation. He's actually been better than I expected as well. Not that I had low expectations for him, but my expectation was more of just like a wait and see category. Like, I'm a believer with kickers. I don't care if you hit 100 in a row in practice. You just do not know what to expect from a kicker until you see it in a game situation. And, I mean, what are we saying about that ODU game if Herrera doesn't hit 3 of 4 kicks? You know what I'm saying?
I'd be saying a loss.
Mm-hmm. That could completely change the season.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you stole almost every point that I was going to make, so thank you for that. But Herrera was like the biggest reason that it actually puts it over the top for me that they've been a little bit better. And it's a good point that you made, Wes, about the kickers, because you think back to the Herrera-Jeter battle in 2022. I remember Pete Limbo saying, we're charting pretty similar in practice, 80-something% of makes. Well, Jeter barely wins the job. They're like, I guess we'll let Mitch go out there and kick in the first game. Nails a 50-something yarder and then doesn't miss. He literally makes 100% of them. Then you get this offseason, it looks like Herrera's probably the leader. They kind of open things up, actually, in practice. Beamer's publicly talking about how they need more consistency. And Herrera's not 100%. But he's got, 2 misses? Mm-hmm. One of them's a 49-yarder that barely missed, and he missed a 40-something yarder in game 1. He's been good. He's been what you've wanted. Kai Kroger's himself. Are there some nitpicky things about, coverage or return? Sure, but I think they've been a little bit better overall than I thought.
And real quick, they kicked to Barry
Brown. Oh, yeah.
Kentucky. They did
nothing.
They said, we ain't scared.
He did nothing.
And covered.
Yep.
So,
very true. We'll come back, wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Get Shane Beamer's initial thoughts on the goals for this weekend's game against Akron. That's coming up next here on your Wednesday on the game.
Adrian Wojnarowski's
Going to be the GM at
St. Bonaventure.
Yep.
That's wild.
More seconds. All right, guys. We were out at Firehouse Subs for 3 hours yesterday. Let me tell you, we had an absolute feast. We had Tyler's Turkey Bacon Ranch. We had my brisket, add bacon. We had the new Captain's Club. We had, what else we have? New York Steamer. Chris, what did you try? Cajun chicken you said you like? Man, we had a little bit of everything. There is something for you at Firehouse Subs. Probably a lot of things you're going to like at Firehouse Subs, but whatever your favorites are, whether that's turkey, ham, roast beef, brisket, you want to try something a little bit different, that Captain's Club, man, it's really, really good. Got some hot sauce on there. And so whatever it is, hey, we had a meatball with pepperoni as well. I'm forgetting that one. Whatever you like, they got something for you at Firehouse. Head on over to firehousesubs.com or get the Firehouse Subs app. Hit the Rapid Rescue to go right now and get your lunch. Shout out, as always, to our guy, Larry Chandler, for being a great host out there at Firehouse Subs. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Reminder coming up tomorrow, Carolina Calls, Coach Beamer, Tide Ellis, 6 o'clock right here on the Game, as you can listen to Beamer's final thoughts ahead of Saturday night's game against Akron, which he addressed a little bit yesterday in talking to the media for his usual Tuesday press conference. Cut number 13 here, Dave. Coach Beamer laying out goals for the Akron game Saturday night.
A win, honestly. Beyond that, certainly coming out of this game with a win, coming out of this game healthy, and really just, we talked about it as a team this morning that we're now, fourth of the way through the regular season. And after Saturday, we're going to be a third of the way through the regular season. And how quickly can we get better? And each day is getting closer and closer to the end of the regular season. So I'd love to come out of this game on Saturday healthy with a win, but also just really feeling like we've gotten better. And you're seeing signs of that. I just mentioned with some of the receivers and Fred Johnson, what he's, as a freshman, he's doing a good job from a special team standpoint. And David Busey's a true freshman playing on a lot of our special teams, and he continues to get better. So just really feeling that we've made progress. We came out healthy, and we won the game, most importantly.
And, winning, obviously, biggest objective, make sure nobody gets hurt. Again, objective number 2 there. And when it comes to building confidence, we've seen this team in all those areas that we talked about with going position group by position group steadily take steps forward for the most part. And you hope you can do that on Saturday night, as well as build a little bit of confidence. And again, coming away from losing the game the way you lost it to LSU, it sucks. And this is obviously a tough week coming away from that. But going out there and hopefully being able to beat an Akron team the way many people expect you to by multiple touchdowns, build you that confidence going into your bye week to get set for what's the toughest part of the schedule coming up the month of October.
Let me fill in one more blank in there for him. Win the game big. That's not something you would say publicly, but I think it matters. For one, it would continue a little bit of that momentum, which seems dumb to say as I'm saying it out loud. You don't maybe most of the times get momentum from losing a football game, but I do think there's something to be said for not a moral victory, but showing in that locker room, maybe you believed you could win. Maybe you expected to win. Maybe you were 99.9% sure you were going to go out there and compete with LSU and have a chance to win the game. But I think now you kind of know whoever you go up against, you got a shot to win for the rest of this season. So I think to maybe continue to show that by just beating up on a team that you're supposed to, frankly. You're a 4-touchdown favorite in this thing. Something Steve Spurrier used to talk about, the chance to sort of empty the bench. All those other guys on this team, like you got 85 scholarship guys, you got 115 plus guys on the roster, and a lot of them that don't play work just as hard as the guys that do play. So there's something for your locker room about getting the other guys, the third-teamers, fourth-teamers, the walk-ons, the other freshmen, getting them on the field and letting them go do it in front of their families at Williams-Brice Stadium. For one, that keeps your starters and your main contributors maybe on the sideline for a half, so they're not risking getting hurt. But there's something special. Look at Maurice Brown II when he got the scholarship announcement. The way his teammates reacted to him getting out there. If Carolina gets a big lead on Saturday and is able to put the third-teamer, fourth-teamer guys in, and somebody makes a big play or somebody scores a touchdown that doesn't normally get those opportunities, watch how that sideline reacts to them being able to go have a moment at Williams-Brice Stadium. To me, that's something you don't want to talk down on Akron by mentioning that as a head coach on Tuesday leading into a game, but it matters, and it's an opportunity for that. I think if you want to add another goal to the list, it was not just win the game big, get these other guys on the field.
Yeah, I actually think that obviously that the starting point is win the game, but I actually think it's more important for the team to win the game just for the rest factor than the psychological factor, right? After the Old Dominion game, I mean, they squeaked that one out basically, and then they went on the road and everybody else is worried, well, gosh, are they going to be able to beat Kentucky? Well, could we be looking at some people, Kentucky's going to blow us out,
That's college football playoff Kentucky to you.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, if they would have just beaten Georgia, they'd be in.
Well, if Mark Stoops wouldn't have punted with 5 minutes to go in the game at midfield, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, hey, sure. He defended that decision, Tyler.
Of course he did.
But, I think it's more important for the team to get that rest to see some others. I don't think this team's psyche is damaged if they if it's a closer than expected game. Of course, you want to win big when possible.
Plenty more conversation about Akron as the week goes along, leading up to Saturday night's game. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Halftime show with myself, Terry Ford, coming up next here on the game.
All right, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at Classic Roofing before I get out of here. Residential and commercial roofing services throughout the Columbia, South Carolina, and surrounding areas. Hit up my friends Max Sawyer and Joe Reeder, both longtime residents of the Palmetto State. With families who live here, they want